Daylight saving time. The first time I heard these three words, I wondered, how can you actually collect the daylight and store it somewhere? I thought there wasn't any sense to it. It's just an illusion, right? Just one of these weird practices Westerners do to look different, to appear more advanced than the rest of the world. So I decided after a long time guessing to finally understand what this absolute absurdity is all about and why those guys have so integrated it into their calendar that it happens automatically now. Now, for the sake of keeping my mind in one piece, which was threatened by researching this phenomenon, I had to limit my region of interest to just a few countries, and you see that this makes it easier for you to understand as well. Unsurprisingly, UK and the US are among these countries. So lose them, isn't it? So how does daylight saving time, also known as DST, work? The common practice is to move the hour hand of the clock forward by at least 1 hour. Why? So that it appears that the daytime lasts longer. So if the time right now is 5:30 p.m., I'm going to move it to 6:30 p.m. So when your clock says 7:30 p.m., the actual normal time is 6:30 p.m. If you've ever involuntarily experienced this due to a broken watch, or you adjusted the time on your Android phone so that you get more lives for Score Hero, then you must have been a bit surprised. How can it be 7:30 and everywhere is still bright like this? Then you realize, oh, wrong time. I speak from experience. But does that even make enough sense? Does that justify it? Why would you want more daytime? To know why these regions wanted more daytime, we would have to look through the history of daylight saving time. Here and there were practices of DST in ancient times, but the first time anything like saving daylight was ever recorded in history was in 1784, when Benjamin Franklin, in an essay, lightheartedly suggested that people should wake up earlier in the summer. But the actual history of DST as it is known today began in New Zealand with George Hudson. Not Britain's controversial railway king of the mid-19th century. No, not that man. The insect enthusiast from New Zealand who used the leisure time his work shift afforded him to hunt for insects. So one day he thought, what if I had more time to collect bugs? So in 1895, he presented a paper to Wellington Philosophical Society in which he proposed that the clock be moved 2 hours forward to preserve daylight. After consideration, New Zealand will commemorate the Summertime Act in 1927, passing daylight saving time into law. Now, the British were 11 years quicker in legalizing DST though. In 1916, they enacted the British Summertime Act. Theirs was chiefly due to campaigns led by William Willett, a builder who observed that window blinds of many houses were still tightly closed way past daybreak. He also wanted to enjoy his golf well before dusk, so in a pamphlet titled The Waste of Daylight, Willett proposed that clocks should be advanced 80 minutes during April and reversed the same way during September. This would increase evening recreational time and save over £2 million in how much was spent on lights for the night. After many vigorous campaigns and several unsuccessful attempts to get the parliament to pass DST into law, it eventually became law in 1916. But it took the World War to finally convince the British Parliament. See, there was need to preserve coal, which was used as the raw material to create lights for nighttime. Coal that was critically needed for industrial production and other war-related activities at the time. Germany had already commenced DST nationally on 30th of April 1916, so Britain followed suit, enacting the Summertime Act on the 17th of May that year. Unfortunately, Willett never got to witness the fruit of his labour as he died a year earlier, in 1915, from influenza. The Daylight Inn in Petwood, Bromley, London was named in his honour. Fun fact: William Willett is the great-great-grandfather of this man, Chris Martin, one of the founders of Coldplay. Today, the practice in Britain is to move the clock 1 hour forward when it's 1 a.m. Daylight saving time, or British summer time as they call it, begins on the last Sunday of March and ends on the last Sunday of October. In the US, DST begins at 2 a.m. on the second Sunday of March and ends on the last Sunday of October. Now, the history of DST in the US is a bit complicated for two reasons. First is because theirs was inconsistent, so they'll adopt DST for a few years and then abolish it another few years. And secondly is because, remember, it's a federation, which means that states have their own laws. So one state might pass DST as a law and observe it, while another may not even recognize DST as a law at all. But then also in one state, you could find regions which observe DST and then other regions in that same state that did not observe DST. Just so complicated. Again, Germany was the first country to officially adopt DST in 1916, but US was a bit reluctant until about 7 months before the end of World War I. On the 19th of March 1918, they enacted the Standard Time Act, which did two things. First, it confirmed the existing normal time, and then it set DST to begin on March 31st that year. Congress would abolish DST after the war ended, so it became an option left to each state whether or not they wanted to continue to observe daylight saving time. For example, New York City continued to observe DST, and being the financial capital, other places soon began to follow suit. The US would establish another nationwide DST in 1942 because of World War I under Franklin Roosevelt, which lasted more than a year. From around 1945 to 1966, there was no federal law on DST, so states chose whether or not to adopt, and as a result, things became more complicated. But again, there were states where DST was observed in some parts of it, not the whole, like North Dakota and Texas. But even those two were reversing their clocks instead of moving them forward. So in spring, they would reverse their clocks, turn it back about an hour or so, instead of the normal way of moving it forward. All these inconsistencies and complications was also affecting the transportation industry. So they complained and the Uniform Time Act was enacted, which starting from 1967, again provided for standard time but also for DST to be observed, with clocks advancing 1 hour starting from 2 a.m. on the last Sunday in April, and then they will be reversed to normal by 2 a.m. on the last Sunday of October. Now, this act also made sure that this time, any state that wanted to exempt themselves from DST must do it as a whole. No more, oh, Dallas is observing it, but Austin isn't interested. Also, if a state wanted to observe DST, they must follow the national schedule. In 1972, the act was amended to allow states situated or split between time zones to exempt themselves entirely from DST, or to exempt that part of the state that was situated in a different time zone. Like Texas, for example, which today uses Central Time and Mountain Time. A part of Texas, like El Paso, can be exempted from observing DST because El Paso, as well as Hudspeth County, uses the same time zone with the northernmost parts of Mexico, while every other part of Texas uses the same time zone, Central Time. In January 1974, US began a DST trial period that was supposed to last till April 1975. By now, you must be questioning if DST actually defeats its own purpose, because if everywhere was still dark when early risers like the working class woke up, they will still consume light energy to prepare for work. Also, children would have to leave for school while there was barely enough daylight. Well, this issue, among others, were raised by those opposing the DST trial period. In fact, in Florida, there were traffic accidents in these darker mornings, which unfortunately claimed the lives of 8 children. Public support for DST seriously waned, and even the governor of Florida at the time asked for DST law to be repealed. In 1986, the Uniform Time Act was amended, which maintained the end date of DST, but changed DST start date from last Sunday in April to first Sunday in April. Times will be adjusted at 2 a.m. local time. Local time simply means when it's 2 a.m. in New York, the clock advances. In Los Angeles, being 3 hours behind, will have to wait till 2 a.m. before they also advance their clocks. Now, I know what you're thinking. Who advances the clocks even? Would everyone be obliged to wake up at 1:59 a.m. just so that they can move their clocks 1 hour forward? I will be answering that question shortly. But before then, let's conclude this convoluted US history. See if we can squeeze out some more interesting, useful details. This new amended 1986 Uniform Time Act maintained American DST start and end dates till 2006. Starting in 2007, a new act amending UTA Uniform Time Act, called the Energy Police Act, would extend DST, this time starting from the second Sunday of March and ending on the first Sunday of November. Now, the reason for enacting an entirely new act was because the Uniform Time Act from the 1960s was no more really compatible with American society. It was still based on the commuting and energy patterns from the 60s. By 2007, roads had more cars. Homes and offices now used LED lights, programmable thermostats, and so on. Another reason for extending DST start and end dates was to prevent more traffic accidents. This time, the DST period would cover more weeks in the year and consequently more days with daylight by the busiest hours of the day. The time when people are returning from work, doing evening shopping, heading to a friend's place for dinner, or just going out to take a stroll, enjoy the evening vista. Both pedestrians and road users would still be able to see clear enough. The golf industry was one of the beneficiaries of this DST extension during this period. It realized a $200 million increase in revenue. More people were buying golf clubs. William Willett would have been smiling proud. Now, seeing the benefits, some leaders even sought for a further extension of DST well into November so that during Halloween, children would go trick-or-treating under more daylight. Since the 2007 extension, there has been proposals to either extend DST more or even outright make it permanent all year round. Over the years, several science societies and publications have weighed in as well in favor of permanent DST, prompting legislative actions on it, but none has been officially passed into national law till now. Who turns the clock? Let's take, for instance, someone living in Brussels, Belgium. I really cannot remember why I chose Brussels for this example. I'm sure there's a reason, just cannot remember. Let's say someone living there wakes up by 5 a.m. on Saturday, the 28th of March, 2026. Now, the date is really important to note here because in Belgium and most European regions that practice DST, like the UK, they spring forward on the last Sunday of March and fall back on the last Sunday of October. So, on the 28th of March 2026, they will still be on standard normal time before they begin DST on Sunday, the 29th, the last Sunday of March 2026. Now, this Belgian guy, let's call him Kevin, goes about his day as usual. Same thing on the next day, 29th of March 2026. He wakes up, goes about his day as usual. Then in the afternoon, he goes shopping, comes back at around 4:30 p.m., checks the time on his phone and goes, phew, what a day. 4:36 p.m. already. But he passes his old analog clock on the table and notices that it says 3:46 p.m. Then he remembers, oh, DST, no wonder I'm a bit tired. And then he adjusts his analog clock time forward by 1 hour. As we've seen throughout history, daylight saving time isn't just a social practice. It actually has a legal backing by actual lawmakers. However, the law will not just automatically shift time forward when DST starts. So who does so? Time is produced by atomic clocks. This is like the physical machine that ticks using the atoms from an element called cesium. This particular element is ideal for atomic clocks because the atoms inside vibrate at an extremely stable measurable frequency. So it's as close to anything that could be found to help keep the atomic clock as accurate as possible in seconds, minutes, hours, and so on. The UK's atomic clock is housed in the National Physical Laboratory in Teddington, while in US, theirs is maintained by the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Globally, time coordination is handled through international standards bodies like the International Bureau of Weights and Measures. I know, even me, I'm getting bored with all these names and science talk. But it's still important because what you get from combining all these atomic clocks into a continuous official time scale is atomic time, or simply the universal time coordinate as we know it. Your phone, laptop, airlines, banks, stock markets, all their systems contain programmed time zone and DST rules. So by the time Kevin woke up on the last Sunday of March in 2026, this system had already automatically shifted the clock for DST. Nobody presses a giant national forward button. No, it's the law that sets it. These atomic clocks keep it, and then software moves it, even in your personal devices which are linked to these systems automatically. Come on, don't act like you didn't know the government had some level of access to your phone. But before we had the internet and all these digital systems to automatically change the time, set the time, how was daylight saving time observed nationally?
Big Ben, Westminster, London, striking 10:30.
Well, someone would walk up to Big Ben in London to turn the clock. I mean, that clock is too massive to not be used, right? So everyone would have to come outside to check Big Ben and make corrections to their timepieces to, match what Big Ben says. Do you actually think this is how it works? If your answer is yes, well, you are kind of correct. Before the internet, daylight saving time was observed using official broadcast time signals and manual clock changes. Now in the UK, the official reference time was Greenwich Mean Time, GMT, which was historically determined at the Royal Observatory Greenwich or the United States Naval Observatory in the US. That time was distributed across the country through telegraph lines and later radio broadcasts like the BBC, including the Greenwich Time signal, which allowed institutions and the public to synchronize their clocks. And when daylight saving time legally began, government announced the change in advance, and at the specified hour, people, railways, broadcasters and businesses manually moved their clocks forward or backward by 1 hour using the official broadcast time as the reference. So you see, you are not that way of the answer. Now, so far we've seen the benefits of daylight saving time to the regions observing it. Here in Nigeria, there's no record of even a suggestion for DST practice, and that goes for most African countries as well. It wouldn't really do much for us because we are near the equator, so daylight hours barely change over the year. Although you must have noticed that we do have days when daylight only completely goes out around 7 p.m. compared to later in the year when it happens around 6 p.m. But those are rookie numbers compared to regions farther away from the equator, like UK or US, where sunsets can shift by 5 to 7 hours between winter and summer. Leading up to the summer, the days get longer and longer up until around June 21st. From then, they get shorter and shorter, and nights get longer until around December 21st. So you can see the rationale behind Franklin's remark on people sleeping through so much daylight in the summer, and also why there has been attempts to extend the start and end dates even further to stretch and cover more months. But as I already said earlier in the video, some were never and are still not fans of DST, especially farmers. They were one of the groups that chiefly pushed back against DST after the war ended because, unlike office workers, their work depends on sunlight itself. So for them, they couldn't care less what the time says. Most farmers have adapted to the system now, but those in rural areas still find DST inconvenient. On a larger scale, certain states in the US like Arizona and Hawaii refuse to practice DST. All the way up northwest, Alaska sees it as a nuisance. So after all that rambling, you can see why it makes sense to the regions that observe it and why we might never ever have to use DST here in Nigeria. At a point, I was thinking DST must be a facade because if clocks get advanced today, I will only really feel the effects today and maybe tomorrow and next. But after then, everything blends into routine. But then I remember that the sun in all its size and glory can never be controlled by our shifting clocks. Oh, just imagine the catastrophe those ABBA-made researches would have caused. We simply are only moving time with all the activities we built around it. So does it make sense to you now?